The insult landed before I'd even finished my sentence. You hear that, guys? That's how you run a forklift shift, by the book, with bedtime stories and all. Laughter rolled across the loading dock, mostly from new hires too fresh to know better. I stood in front of them during orientation, walking through the safety protocols like I had for years. My supervisor leaned against the doorframe, grinning like he'd cracked the world's funniest joke. I didn't react, not visibly, but inside, something cold shifted. That wasn't banter, that was performance. A public jab meant to draw a line between him, the charismatic boss, and me, the by-the-book vet who couldn't take a joke. I'd been running night shifts at this distribution hub for over a decade. Long hours, split-second decisions, a crew that counted on structure and consistency. I wasn't flashy. I didn't grandstand. I kept things moving, quietly, efficiently. Maybe too quietly. He'd been in charge of my team ever since a reshuffle moved me under his wing, swagger in boots, called the place his second home. Always laughing a little too loud, too long. I tolerated it, even when his smirks lingered too long after my suggestions. But this time, something felt different. His tone, the crowd, the timing. He'd interrupted my session to flex. I caught one of the younger guys, a Navy kid like me, glance away, uncomfortable. Later that night, I walked the floor. My steps echoed down empty concrete lanes, machines idle, hum of the HVAC louder than usual. I ran my checklist, same as always, but my focus kept drifting. Why now? Why like that? A week ago, he'd suddenly started joining my training sessions, said it was just oversight, but he'd never cared before. He'd been showing up on my shift unannounced, asking about daily logs I'd already filed, taking credit for a route optimization I'd implemented 2 months prior. Then I noticed something else, tiny but telling. A message left open on a shared terminal, an internal chat, likely not meant for me to see. The last line still lingered on screen. He's solid with protocol, but zero leadership instincts. Guys stuck in a Cold War playbook. That wasn't just teasing. That was a judgment, a summary, a label. And it was typed, not spoken, intended for someone else. I didn't touch it, just logged out. But I couldn't unsee it. The next day, an HR analyst from the day shift, someone I barely knew, stopped me in the break room. She hesitated before saying, "Have you noticed any changes in how your performance is being framed upstairs?" I kept my face neutral. "What do you mean?" She just shook her head. "Never mind. Just be aware. Some stuff isn't adding up." That night, I pulled old copies of shift reports, time logs, route plans. Something told me to check for edits. And that's when I found it. A digital trail showing my logs had been altered before being forwarded up the chain. Not enough to be criminal, but enough to shift credit. Make it look like I was supporting, not leading. Not a mistake, a pattern. And suddenly, I wasn't wondering if I was being mocked. I was wondering how long I'd been getting erased. How do you react when initial doubts turn into undeniable, unsettling proof? It started with a spreadsheet. I pulled it from the backup server after hours, when most of the building was asleep except for the hum of refrigeration units and the occasional groan of metal shelving settling into place. The document was one I'd created: shift performance breakdowns, time-stamped decisions, which drivers rerouted, which loads went where. I'd built the format myself over the years. It was a blueprint of how I kept the chaos in check. Only now, entire entries had been revised, words changed, decisions reassigned. In 2 key places, his name had been inserted in my place. Subtle edits, but the pattern was consistent. The file wasn't mine anymore. It had been sanitized to reflect a different author of efficiency. I didn't panic. I printed a clean version of the original from my offline backup drive. Then I started documenting everything. I logged terminal use times. I set up version tracking on shared files. Every message, every edit, every route adjustment now had a screenshot. If he wanted to twist my work into a narrative of incompetence, I was going to pull the thread until the whole thing unraveled. But the real break came from the HR analyst, the one who'd approached me in the break room. Her name wasn't on my radar until she emailed me directly. FYI, during internal feedback routing, your name didn't show up on several shift-level innovations. You might want to check the review logs from March and April. Let me know if you need help navigating the back end. I met her during a scheduled cross-departmental safety audit the next morning. She didn't say much, just handed me a list of logs with dates and chat references. Then she nodded once, like we both knew a fuse had just been lit. Back in my car that night, I reviewed the chat logs from the internal platform. It was all there. He's got discipline but no people skills. I keep having to clean up after his shift reports. He's a decent grunt, doesn't see the bigger picture. These weren't just offhand remarks. They were being shared with corporate liaisons, the very people evaluating frontline leadership. He wasn't just bad-mouthing me. He was reshaping how others saw me, preloading the narrative so if I ever pushed back, it would look like overreaction. It hit me harder than I expected, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me of something older. Years ago, during my last deployment, a junior officer rewrote our incident report to minimize his own negligence. We lost equipment, nearly lost a life. I took the fall publicly, because I followed protocol, because I didn't speak fast or loud. I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. And here I was, again. Quiet, disciplined, watching someone louder rewrite reality. I stared at the chat logs, heart thudding slow but hard. One line stood out more than the rest. Guy's a glorified night janitor, barely stringing sentences together, good for grunt work, not vision. He didn't know those chats were being archived, and he definitely didn't know corporate had begun auditing internal communications as part of a silent digital leadership review, a policy that had kicked in the previous quarter. That's when it clicked. His attempts to humiliate me in front of recruits, the credit stealing, the fake concern over my limited ambition, it was panic, desperate theater to undermine a threat he hadn't expected. Because somewhere, quietly, something had shifted, and he felt it. I decided to test that theory. During the next safety review, I offered a quiet observation about rebalancing load sequences to reduce turnaround. The warehouse manager nodded. My supervisor smirked and interjected, "We've already modeled that, not worth the disruption." But this time, the manager replied, "Actually, we flagged that idea last week in the audit review. Good to see the floor echoing it." His smile faltered. I excused myself and walked back to the dispatch terminal. When I logged in, there was a new notification from internal communications. Leadership profiles under final review, feedback loops closing this week. I clicked into it. A full summary of my shift-level performance had been auto-generated. It listed 3 key innovations attributed to my name, the same innovations he'd tried to claim. And at the bottom of the report was a flagged conversation. From his own account to a regional lead. If you're seriously considering him for anything beyond shift coordination, don't. He's too rigid. He's military, doesn't adapt. I stared at it for a long minute. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was sabotage, preemptive, strategic. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and cold plastic, that distinct mix of old furniture and recycled air that always reminded me of military briefings. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. I sat at one end of the long table. HR sat across from me, professional but unreadable. He strolled in last, late by 3 minutes, holding a water bottle like it was a microphone, still wearing that same cocky half-smile. When he saw me, it faltered, just for a flicker. That was all I needed. "Didn't realize this was going to be a group review," he said, sliding into his chair. "Or is this a celebration?" HR didn't answer. Instead, the analyst, the one who'd quietly passed me the breadcrumbs, slid a printout across the table. "We've completed the leadership audit," she said. "Before decisions are finalized, we are reviewing key communication logs and leadership behavior indicators with those involved." He barely glanced at the paper before waving it off. "Look, if this is about tone or language, we're not writing poetry out there. You want results, not lullabies." I let the silence hang a beat too long before I spoke. My voice was steady. "Then explain this." I reached into my folder and pulled out a copy of the internal message log, the one with his comments. The line was highlighted. "Guy's a glorified night janitor, barely stringing sentences together." I placed it in front of him. "You sent that to a regional lead, the same week we were being reviewed." His eyes flicked to the paper, then to the analyst, then back to me. "That was out of context. It was venting. Everyone vents." "No," I said quietly. "This was strategy. You wanted me invisible, replaceable, because you thought that would secure your spot." HR cleared their throat, shifting. "We've compared these messages to shift performance logs. In multiple cases, your contributions were misrepresented. Credit was reassigned. Data shows an intentional pattern." He leaned back. "Okay, maybe I was a little aggressive, but you think protocol makes someone a leader? He's good at night shift minutia. I bring vision, energy." That's when I pulled out the final sheet, the new leadership structure draft, quietly circulated the night before. At the top of the mid-shift restructuring chart, my name. "I run the system you only pretend to understand," I said calmly. "And as of this morning, I'm your new reporting officer." The room went silent. For a full 10 seconds he didn't speak. Then he laughed, the kind of laugh people use when they're trying to swallow rage. "You set me up," he said, leaning forward, eyes narrow. "You've been planning this." "No," I interrupted. "You set yourself up. I just stopped cleaning up after you." He stood. "This isn't over." HR remained seated. "Actually, it might be. You'll have the option of stepping into a project advisor role or accepting severance. That decision is effective immediately." He froze. His mouth opened, then shut. The analyst pushed a folder toward him. I should have felt victorious. But in that moment, I saw the truth behind his swagger. Fear. Fear of being replaced by someone who earned respect without demanding it. Still, I didn't flinch. I fought for the guys on my shift who never raised their voices, for the nights we kept the place running without applause, for my name. But just as I stood to leave, HR added one more thing. "There's one complication," she said carefully. "Some of the altered reports, they didn't originate solely from his login. We're tracing access history. There may have been someone else involved." I stopped cold. "Someone else?" She nodded. "Someone in floor management might have facilitated the edits, quietly. Another player, hidden, watching." The victory wasn't complete. Not yet. How do you proceed when the truth is revealed, but the battle is far from over? I sat in my truck for a long time after that meeting. Engine off, hands clenched around the steering wheel like it was the last solid thing in my world. The victory had felt hollow. Not because I hadn't earned it, I had, every damn inch of it, but because the betrayal had gone deeper than I thought possible. He wasn't working alone. Someone I trusted had helped erase me, and now the air in that building felt thick with ghosts. I kept replaying the chat logs in my mind, the smirks, the cut-off sentences in meetings, the times I'd stayed late cleaning up schedules others had wrecked. I'd carried it all without complaint. Now it hit like a freight load, not just disrespect, but deception. Anger didn't come as fire, it came as focus. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition, the kind you couldn't fake, rewrite, or steal. I wanted the truth to be unignorable. That night I called a friend, a logistics consultant I'd served with years ago, now working compliance for a supply chain firm.
When I told him what happened, he didn't ask if I was exaggerating. He just said, "Do you have the paper trail?" "I've got everything," I said. "Then you're not just fixing your rep, you're protecting your future. You let this slide, it stains every role after this. You want to lead? Start by defending the ground you've already earned." He connected me with a labor attorney the next morning. We met in a diner, corner booth, surrounded by the scent of bacon grease and overbrewed coffee. I slid the folder across the table. Chat logs, altered spreadsheets, a printed memo of my corrected project credits from the leadership audit. The lawyer flipped through it all, nodding slowly. "You're not suing for money," she said. "You're suing for record integrity. This is reputation warfare." She helped me draft a formal statement for HR, backed by evidence and requesting a complete audit of all reports filed under my name for the past 12 months. It wasn't about vengeance. It was about correcting the foundation before I built anything higher. But that wasn't the only move. I quietly reached out to 2 of the floor supervisors I trusted, guys who'd worked nights with me for years. I showed them the logs, the edits. One of them stared at the screen and whispered, "He made us sign off on those logs. Told us it was just streamlining. Said corporate didn't care who filed what as long as the job got done." They looked sick. I told them the truth. They care now. By week's end, 3 formal testimonies had been submitted to HR from people he thought were too tired or too quiet to notice. But just as the tide started turning fully my way, a new file landed in my inbox. Anonymous, no subject line. Inside, an audio clip. It was his voice, and someone else's, distorted but female, talking about burying the military guy before promotion rounds went public. The analyst? No, too careful. It hit me. The assistant floor manager. She'd handled log submissions, ran night crew hiring, always polite, always present. I played the clip again. This wasn't over. I dug up rot, and now it was deeper than either of them wanted me to know. When your plan is in motion, but the stakes suddenly rise, how far are you willing to go?
The meeting room felt different this time. Warmer, quieter. Maybe it was just me, finally breathing without the weight of being second-guessed. They offered her the same options they'd given him: step down quietly or face a formal misconduct inquiry. She chose severance. No drama, no last words, just a signed paper and a door swinging shut. With her gone, the last thread of their quiet alliance unraveled. It didn't fix everything, not right away, but it ended the cover-up. HR cleared my record. Official memos were updated to reflect original authorship. And while they couldn't undo the months of erasure, they made the correction public, including during a company-wide digital town hall, where new leadership practices were formally tied to systems I'd pioneered. I didn't gloat. Instead, I spent the next 3 weeks rebuilding the night shift from the inside out. We instituted peer review logs, anonymous suggestions, a rotating safety lead voted by the crew, not assigned by management. I handpicked 3 quiet workers who reminded me of myself a decade ago and mentored them through their first leadership modules. For the first time in years, our crew's shift satisfaction rating outpaced the day crew, not because we were louder, but because we listened. I started running again, not for fitness, for clarity. The cold air in my lungs reminded me I was still here, still moving forward, not circling in someone else's orbit. I reconnected with a few guys from my unit. We started meeting monthly, sharing stories we hadn't told in years. One of them, now working trauma logistics, offered to co-lead a mentorship program for transitioning vets. I said yes before he finished his sentence. Looking back, I didn't win because I was the smartest or the fastest. I won because I didn't break, because I protected the work, even when they tried to bury the worker. And because I remembered something they never understood. Real leadership isn't declared, it's felt, especially by the ones no one's watching. They taught me to lead with quiet conviction. He mistook it for weakness. That's how I knew I'd already won. Is justice about punishment or about reclaiming your name? Share your own story or thoughts in the comments below.